Welcome back to the New Earth Transitionary Government Podcast. This is Aurora, and this portion is going to be on the Directors' Council. So the idea of the NetG, as I said, is that it is made up of sovereign beings who work in a council format rather than in a traditional hierarchical structure where there are those who have power over others, or they have power to basically make decisions for others, right? Because I think that the issue of power is what we're dealing with in terms of the transition from 3D to 5D, is that we have to have power with and not power over. But as I said in the first podcast, the reason why a transitionary government is necessary until we are fully established as a sovereign society, as a galactic society, which at that point, right, we might move into more of a self-governance model. That is completely possible. Or we might stay with a transitionary model, but it will change. But the reason why it's necessary during the transition is because the ego is still in existence. And as long as the ego is still in existence, and as long as a majority of the population is existing in the ego mind, you run the risk of having people in positions of power or authority who will misuse it. Or you run the risk of people being placed into leadership positions or positions of authority who have ego. The ego programmed mind is the root cause of all of the problems on the planet. It is the root cause of the pain and suffering on the planet. So until that is fully eradicated, humanity is not ready. They are not spiritually mature enough to self-govern, right? Now, again, this is not about controlling, and this is not about having power over anyone. This is simply the reality that during the transition and in this model of governments, you do need to have a council of beings who have already gone through their ego death process. They have actually been leading by example. They are aligned with source. They are aligned with universal law and right action. They are also committed to being in integrity. They are committed to leading by example. So they are embodying the divine traits of taking accountability. They have self-awareness. They've done the inner work. They hold themselves to a place of high integrity to stay in alignment with love and universal law. You have to have a council made up of those beings who can oversee all of the other councils and the decision-making process and the transition. Because without that, again, you run the risk of people of the masses making decisions because they want to be self-governing, but they are not spiritually mature enough to make decisions that are best for the whole rather than just themselves. They may not be spiritually mature enough to make decisions that are right action, because they can still be acting from a place of programming. They can still be acting from a place of wounding or trauma or ego. So the Directors' Council needs to be made up of beings who have reached a certain level of higher self-embodiment, spiritual maturity, and are highly trained, so that they can train all other council members, as well as helping to educate and teach humanity on the transition process, on the ascension and awakening process. And so the Directors' Council will be made up of those beings. And their role, again, is to simply oversee the process, to make sure that the entire transition and humanity as a whole is staying in alignment with Source. And that is going to become very important. So, the roles and responsibilities of the Directors' Council. The Directors' Council is made up of beings who have dedicated their lives to the service of humanity. These beings have the role to oversee and implement the vision for New Earth. This council is responsible to guide and oversee all other councils to ensure that all decisions and teachings are aligned with universal law and are aligned with the highest frequency. This council will meet with every other council to discuss the ever-evolving collective consciousness and have open dialogue with all other council leaders about ideas and projects to implement that will best serve humanity. This council may also choose to create new councils based on the needs or the suggestions of the collective. Any being who takes a leadership role in any council and shows their dedication may be nominated by a Directors' Council member and will be voted on by the council. The goal of the Directors' Council is to ensure a smooth and harmonious transition from the 3D system to the 5D system. The role of each Directors' Council member is to lead by example, embody 100% commitment to their ascension path, and to help teach, guide, and oversee others who are also serving as council members and humanity as a whole. So, and the question will be, right, when I mentioned like there's not going to be necessarily like elections and, you know, people who are trying to compete for this certain role. It is based on energetics, it is based on frequency, and it's based on embodiment. So it will be very, very clear who is actually leading by example, who is actually done the necessary ego death work, who has the experience and the wisdom to be in such a role. That will be very, very obvious. And part of what we're doing here at the NetG is already trying to create that network of leaders so that when the time comes to implement this blueprint, we already have a good idea of who those leaders are. The ones who are consistently embodying that higher self, who are committed to this process and who are in integrity. That will be, again, it's going to be very obvious and very clear. So many of you might resonate with being in that position of leadership. Now, again, there's no perfection to be attained. Like there's no one on this planet who's perfect. It's just that there is some beings who have more experience on this journey and have more wisdom and have done more inner work. And so we're trying to create that network of leaders. So again, when the time comes, we know who is best to be in this type of overseeing role, like the Directors' Council, as well as those who would be leaders of the other councils, right? There may be someone who is really knowledgeable and has great experience and great wisdom in the realm of healing and wellness. And so they might be a great leader for the Healing and Wellness Council, which would be to oversee the transition from the old healing model to the new healing model, right? So everybody has a place, but the natural leaders and those who are embodying true leadership will be made very obvious. And many of those beings, including those of you who listen to this, would likely either choose to or be guided to be part of the Directors' Council and the overseeing of this. So one of the first decrees that came through that would be a decree that the Directors' Council would immediately enact. This is specific to the United States, but again, all of these blueprints, all of these solutions and ideas can be modified to be implemented in any area of the world. So this is just an example, but this is the United States of America's leading by example decree. As decreed by source, the United States of America is contracted by creation to lead this ascension by example. The U.S. has been designated as the foundation of the ascension process and the ascension point. The United States, as a unified collective, must lead the planetary ascension by example. The U.S. is to be the example of divinity, unity, divine justice, truth, freedom, and love. We will fulfill our contract with Source by taking full accountability for our failures, dysfunctions, and out-of-right action choices. We agree to correct all out-of-right actions and to align ourselves with universal law. We, as a united collective, agree to act in full integrity with our contract and to abide by the decrees of Source, to honor Mother of all creation as our divine director, and to surrender to the divine will for our country. We, as a unified collective, are responsible for transforming our ego programmings both individually and collectively, and to be the beacon of light for the world. We are to set the example for unity, acceptance, compassion, passion, truth, and light. We, as a unified collective, take accountability for all blame, projection, taking of energy and resources, greed, power over, domination, and control. We as a collective agree to work in co-creation and collaboration with all other sovereign nations of the world as one. Now, the next decree to be enacted is the New Earth Transitionary Government Decree, enacted by the Directors' Council. As decreed by Source, all current governmental structures are hereby dissolved and replaced with the NetG structure. NetG has 90 days to implement the new structure to allow for a seamless transition. Once the entire collective has chosen to transition to 5D. The new U.S. Constitution will be immediately effective upon the date of this transition, as well as the sovereign being decrees. All immediate decrees will also be in effect as of the date of this transition. Education for all former governmental personnel will be provided within the 90 days of transition in order to establish their roles of service within their community, as well as to ascertain if any former government employees are a vibrational match to the NetG councils. All meetings, information, and education must be open source to be able to be accessed and viewed by all citizens at any time, and must include a platform to provide feedback. So the idea there is that upon the collective decision to transition to the new government structure, we would have to implement this within 90 days, and obviously that would entail that much of the current governmental structure would be dissolved, such as agencies and branches of the government that are not in alignment with universal law, are not a vibrational match to 5D. They do not support the people. They do not support sovereignty. Those would need to be dissolved. And as it said, any prior, governmental employees who could be a match to transitioning into NetG service roles could be. If they are not, then they are to, return to their local communities to be of service there. And the final proposal from this council is that there would need to be a bit of a transition as to the current structure. Again, these are just ideas. But it would be based on unity and accountability. So the councils will function as one, starting with the federal councils down to the county levels. Each set of councils will collaborate with one another and will be overseen by advisory boards, which will consist of citizens who are not part of the councils, as a means of keeping integrity and accountability in check. So the idea is that we would continue to have this kind of flowing structure where we would have federal councils, state councils, and then county councils. Each one would be operating as a unit. And so you would have the varying councils existing on each level, and there would be different members for each one, right? So there would be like a federal directors council, there would be a state directors council, there would be a county directors council, etc. And then the idea was to have an advisory board that would also operate for each of those councils. So for example, there would be an advisory board for the federal directors council, for the state, and for the county. And that advisory board is to be made up of citizens who are not part of the councils. You know, it would be like having citizens be advising and overseeing what decisions are being made. So these beings on the advisory board would be volunteers. They would be volunteering to be in that role. And they are not a part of the government structure. And this is to make sure that the decisions and the counseling that is going on is, number one, transparent. Everything must be open sourced and transparent. And two, that if there are any issues that the advisory board picks up and says, hey, this may not work for our citizens, or hey, this might not work for this industry, right? Then we can re-counsel on that. So that would be the advisory board's role. There would also be an integrity council, and they would also, as part of the advisory board, their job and their role is to keep all of the council members in integrity, meaning they are following through on what they said they were going to do. They are staying true to their word, and that they are honoring the role properly, right? That they are not taking advantage of the role in any way, that they are not misusing power in any way. So the Federal Integrity Panel will oversee the appointment of each being that is selected for the councils on all levels. So the Integrity Panel will be chosen as beings who are masters of energy and who can easily discern the frequency of beings, so that they can oversee the chosen members that are being put onto these councils. Okay, so this is just to have some sort of checks and balances to make sure that we are allowing the right people onto the right councils, that everyone is staying in alignment, things like that. So that is the way that the blueprint would work. And this would create transparency, openness, and also collaboration. And just, I think, having feedback from the collective is so important. And right now, in our current government structure, there is no transparency, right? We have no idea who's making these decisions, why they're making these decisions, or even what the decisions are, right? There's a total lack of transparency in that. And there currently is no way for the collective to give feedback to the elected leaders, except for things like social media, or, on media outlets. That is the only feedback that is given, and much of that is censored. Much of that is propagandized. So creating a system where it is all open collaboration, open feedback, transparency, and a really open flow of communication between the government structures and the collective itself. That is going to be, very, very key in the process. So that's the idea for the Directors Council. And of course, you can browse on the website under the Directors Council tab. You can read more about the ideas for that council, as well as some of the other guides that we have put together for things like leading by example, embodying leadership, the suggested new constitution, the sovereignty decrees, and all of that. So I'll be back soon with the next council. Love you guys.